Wanna play?
Throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, there was a big emphasis in horror on slashers. And there were lots of different characters to choose from. You had Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, Freddy Krueger. But there was one character that was a bit different. A very weird one, but overall pretty iconic in the ranks. That's right, today we're talking about Chucky, the killer doll. Chucky, of course, made his debut in the 1988 horror film Child's Play, which was mostly horror, a little bit of comedy, as it tells the story of a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray, who gets his soul put into a good guy doll found at a local toy store after getting shot and killed by the police. He swears revenge on those who have wronged him, and throughout the series, it goes from being mostly horror to mostly comedy, and then back to horror, and then back to comedy. It's a very weird series, but overall, it's one of my favorite franchises in horror history. So today, with the upcoming reboot on its way, we are going to be ranking the Child's Play movies. Now, before we jump into this list, of course, there are a few warnings. First of all, these are all my opinions, so of course, you probably very likely have different opinions, and I want to hear those in the comments down below. So go ahead, go rank the Child's Play films and get back to me. Also remember, I haven't seen some of the films in a little while. I've watched them all within 2 years, but it's been a little bit, some longer than others. So I'm going to try my best to remember everything I can about the plots and the characters. With all of that being said, let's jump into the rankings with the 7th film, the weakest of the bunch, and you likely already know what that is. Number 7, of course, goes to Seed of Chucky, which was released in 2004. Seed of Chucky follows Bride of Chucky, which was done about 6 years earlier, and it dives definitely more into comedy than it does horror. It tells the story of Tiffany and Chucky's son/daughter Glenn, or Glenda, depending on how you look at it, as he tries to discover his parents and they try to discover him. At the same time, they're all trying to put their souls into human hosts, one of which is Jennifer Tilly, who is playing herself but also playing Tiffany. It's a very confusing movie. It does have its entertainment qualities, though. I just watched this one very recently, and I don't think it deserves the biggest gripe in the world, but it is the weakest of this franchise, at least.
Well, come on. It looks like the kid fell off the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down. I mean, you gotta feel bad for the parents. I wonder what they must look like.
It dives too much into comedy and pop culture references, a lot of which don't stick watching it all of these years later. And I don't know, the plot just seems a lot smaller than most of the other Chucky films, and it doesn't quite have the same horror impact. At least in like Bride of Chucky, when the horror happened, it was still relatively scary, but in this film, nothing quite hits that high note. There is a good scene, though, at the very beginning, where Glenn walks up the stairs and murders a family in his nightmare, and that scene was well executed. This film was directed by Don Mancini, who is kind of the creative power mind behind the entire franchise, and he does a pretty relatively good job. His directorial status gets better as the movies go on, but in terms of Chucky movies, Seed has to be the worst. Let's move on to number 6, though. We have Curse of Chucky, which was released in 2013. This film, which was also directed by Don Mancini and starring Fiona Dourif, daughter of Brad Dourif, the Chucky voice actor, follows the story of a woman named Nika, who is bound to a wheelchair, and her family live in this creepy gothic mansion. They must survive as Chucky, of course, comes back and tries to murder them all. I have to say, despite my gripes with Curse of Chucky, it is beautifully shot and the cinematography is really good. There is some gore in this film, and the animatronics mixed with the cinematography and camera work and lighting definitely enhance the gore and the kills in this film. But my biggest gripe is the one odd scene choice and scenic location for a Chucky movie, and two, whereas the previous two films focus too much on comedy, this film dives too much into gothic horror. And while I do love myself some good gothic horror, a killer doll named Chucky isn't exactly the place that should be. The original trilogy of the Child's Play films blended the horror and comedy much better, whereas this film is a little too horror and doesn't have enough comedy, and the other two have a little too much comedy. They were trying to find that good balance, and it's somewhere in here. There are some good scenes, and this is one of the scarier ones in the franchise, but overall it's one of the weaker ones in my opinion. Let's move on to number 5, which goes to Bride of Chucky, which was actually released the same month I was born, 1998 in October. It follows, actually Chucky's girlfriend, believe it or not, who is named Tiffany, and she literally pieces their relationship back together one stitch at a time. This is where we of course got the stitched Chucky look, and also where the series takes a far more comedic turn. In the late 90s, when Scream was kind of the big horror hype at the time, a lot of films wanted to use that Scream template of mixing horror and comedy, but Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky take it a little too far in the comedy direction. There's a lot of pop culture references and jokes that don't quite stick as well as maybe they did in the late 90s and early 2000s. This one is, of course, better, though, than Seed of Chucky. The horror scenes are more, gut-punching, if you will, and more scary than Seed of Chucky, where they kind of downplayed it. Also, Jennifer Tilly, of course, does a great job in this film. She does in all of the movies and gives it more of a heart to the story. But, again, this story feels rather small in scope compared to the other films. They are trying to find an amulet to put their souls into human hosts, but that whole plot line's just brought up for convenience sake and was never mentioned in the other movies. You have to kind of suspend your disbelief and just kind of have fun for the ride, which is literally true in this movie because there is a big emphasis on a car drive throughout the film.
How dare you speak to me that way?
You started it!
I did not!
Overall, it is enjoyable. The human characters aren't quite as interesting to justify a big chunk of screen time dedicated to them, but overall, Bride of Chucky isn't as bad as the other two, but not nearly as great as the next 4. Which, speaking of which, number 4 is gonna go to Cult of Chucky, which was released in 2017 and is the newest in the Child's Play franchise. It follows Nika from Curse of Chucky as she is put into a mental asylum because of the previous events in Curse, and everyone believes she is crazy. She's seeing things, but of course, as the audience all knows, Chucky is alive and after her yet again, murdering people in this hospital and trying to get inside of Nika's body. So, when I first saw Cult of Chucky, and by the way, it is on Netflix, so you can find it there, that's where it debuted, I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought it was too over the top, too goofy, and too stupid. But then you kind of have to remember, wait, this is a Chucky movie after all, and when you suspend your disbelief and just kind of let things happen, it actually is a pretty well done movie. It's shot really well yet again, these scenes in the asylum are interesting, And whereas I felt the Curse of Chucky house was a little too dark and gothic, the asylum is a nice touch because it introduces Chucky in a way that makes sense to the rest of the film. Nika is being exposed to the thing that the doctors believe is causing her a lot of stress and anxiety. And of course, Chucky has a Voodoo for Dummies book, and spoiler alert, he is able to transfer his soul into a variety of hosts, so there are multiple good guy dolls running around doing his dirty work. And you also have a side plot of Andy trying to come back into the picture and kill Chucky once and for all. This one's definitely weird and you have to suspend your disbelief, but it is overall pretty enjoyable and it captures that good blend of horror and comedy that the original trilogy of the Child's Play films did. It's also shot really well, like I said, the music's pretty interesting and plays to the tone, and it's overall just a pretty good one. I love the special effects, and the good guy doll animatronics are some of the best in the series. But now we are down to the top 3, the original span of the Child's Play films before Bride and any of the other ones that I've mentioned. I like all of these ones a lot, but obviously there are some better contenders than others, so number 3 goes to Child's Play 3. So, Child's Play 3 was released in 1991, and it follows a grown-up Andy now, in military school of all places, kind of going off of the Full Metal Jacket motif, if you will, and he has to survive in military school, not just from the dictator-like drill sergeants, but of course, Chucky, because he's back again. But the little twist here is, instead of Chucky trying to get into Andy's body, he has found a little boy that he is going to put his soul into instead. So now Andy has to protect a young child, as he was the young child in the other films.
Hey, long time no see, pal.
No, you're dead. We killed you.
You know what they say. You just can't keep a good guy down.
I really like this one, and I'm not quite sure why, because I know a lot of people really don't, but the tone is just there for me for some reason. Even despite the conflicting, weird elements of the military school stuff going on, I still find this one pretty enjoyable. This one, though it has some of the most cheese, has to be expected because it is, of course, a Chucky film, but there are 2 other contenders slightly above Child's Play 3. And of course, number 2, shockingly, goes to Child's Play, 1988. I know what you're saying. Hauntformer, you can't rank a sequel above the original. Can you? Yes, I can. So, most people would agree that Child's Play is one of the best in the series. It is the one that really started it all. You have a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray, as he gets his soul transferred into a good guy doll because he is friends with this voodoo guy. It's a very weird plot, but very interesting and unique for the time. You have a woman who buys this good guy doll kind of in a back alley because they're relatively expensive at this time. And she gets this for her son Andy's birthday, and he comes to find out that Chucky is alive. But throughout the film, you don't really know that. You kind of are suspecting, well, is Andy the one doing these horrible things? Is it Chucky? You're not too sure until, of course, at the very end, Chucky literally comes to life and starts murdering people. Then you truly know what's up. My only big gripe with this film, and there's a lot of great things to be said, like the special effects, the directing's pretty cool, I like the plot. My big gripe is, about halfway through this film is when you start to see Chucky come to life, actually, but the other half is played more for mystery, which is cool the first time you see it, but if you know anything about a Chucky movie, you know he's actually alive, so the mystery kind of gets taken away and you don't really see Chucky as much. But it's still a very interesting film, and it stands up amongst the classic horror ranks. But of course, there's one that I think is slightly better, and that of course goes to... Child's Play 2. So Child's Play 2 is a 1990 direct sequel to the original Child's Play film, and it features Andy, who is now separated from his mother because they deemed her as insane, as he moves to a foster home where he has a friend, a companion named Kyle, and she is kind of a rebel, and Andy's not quite sure of what to think of the foster care system. At the same time, you have Chucky coming back to life at the Good Guy Dolls factory, and he manages to find his way back to Andy to get inside of his body yet again. So, there are very few franchises where a sequel surpasses the original, but in the case of Child's Play, it's most certainly true.
You can't get away from me! I'm gonna kill you, Andy!
This one really lets Chucky shine. Brad Dourif does a great job doing the voice, as he always does, but I think Chucky and the animatronics that are featured in this film really make the character pop and stand out. The tone for this one is solid. You have a great mix of horror and comedy, and the set pieces all work in favor of the killer doll motif. You have, of course, the foster home, you have a school, and then, of course, the grandiose Child's Play Good Guy Doll factory that we never saw in the first film. And all of these set pieces, along with Chucky, his little quips and one-liners, and several of the kills in this movie all play to what makes this one slightly better than the original. I just overall really enjoy this film. And not only is it a great film technically and with the creepy kind of Chucky running around murdering people stuff and the sets and the music, but it also has an impact on me because it's one of the first horror films that I ever saw. So without Child's Play 2, I wouldn't be as into horror as I am today, so I kind of owe it to this film. I saw it on AMC's Fear Fest on TV for the first time, and it really got me curious in slasher films and then later horror films in general. So it just goes to show that Chucky is a classic horror movie monster, and though some people view him as cheese, and he certainly is, or as stupid, I tend to think of him as a weird character in the ranks of slashers, and he is most definitely one of my favorites. So I want to ask you, with this reboot coming up, what are your favorites in the Child's Play franchise? Are you a fan of Chucky? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching this ranking video. Make sure to subscribe if you love all things horror and Halloween. And remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.